How do you create a list in SwiftUI that provides infinite scrolling? In this tutorial, I'm going to show you one example. We need to talk about when to load more data from an API, from the server. And so that we don't load too much to have optimum performance for our application. This is the second part of a series where we are creating a iTunes Store app, and we are using the iTunes Search API. On the left, you see the results from the last tutorial. So I have here a view where I can search for albums with the search term in the text field. And right now I'm fetching here actually 20 results. So I scroll to the bottom and it just stops because I fetch one time this 20 results and then nothing else. Although there's a lot more data on the server that I could show to the user. On the right, you can see an implementation where I did this infinite scrolling. So again, initially I'm only fetching like 50. This is because I have also a different layout. When you scroll, so first of all, these images are only loaded when these views come into view. I actually need to scroll now fast enough. So you see here the loading indicator. This is the moment that I know I'm at the end of the list. I fetch more, and then you see when the additional albums are loaded and shown down here. So I can scroll further, and then again the same thing. So it's always loading more and more. Okay, I guess it's getting slower because I was requesting so much data. So we have to talk about how to load properly large amounts of data in a scroll view. The first thing I need to talk about is paging. How do we request more data? This is usually another term of paging because when I'm searching here something on Google, these results are displayed per page. So they usually have, 20 results. If you scroll down, you see in order to see the next page, I need to tap and then the same thing over and over again. So it's kind of the data is coming in packages of pages, of packages of 20 of my search results. With our API, we do the same. We are requesting 20. For each request that we are sending, we are getting 20 or the number that we are giving there. And then we need to ask for more. And one very simple way of doing this is with an offset. So you can say I want to have a limit of 20, starting at the position in my search results at 0. And then for the next request, you can say with the offset of 20, the next 20. With the offset of 40, the next 20. So we can use this kind of offset in our query. I'm going to continue now on the project that I started, and we should check our request to see how we can ask for more. So actually maybe I should do this up here with the examples. So this is the request of searching for albums with this term, and we're requesting 20. The paging behavior that we can get by using here an end with offset of, in this case, because the limit is 5, we would start by the first one with 0, the second page would be 5, then we would ask for more by 10. So it's then always multiples of this limit until there's no more data, and then we would actually have to stop. So we need to keep track of how often we actually already fetch something. That means what kind of offset we have to look for next. And for this, I need to additionally here to my limits use an offset. So this is actually, or the page, you can choose whatever you want, but I guess the page is okay. This is to be a var because I'm changing this. I'm always adding one more page when I load. This is page, an int, and the first page we are loading is 0. Okay, now I have this and I can change here my query. It's getting to the point where it's a little bit ridiculous, but in the next part I'm going to show you query items, because then we can also redo a little bit of the networking. Okay, so this is another end offset of the offset I have. And I need to have the offset, so I would calculate this by the offset is actually the page multiplied by the limit. So I can do this. And then when I send this, so now I changed my request, and when I here get my albums back, I know I'm finished loading this page, so we can load the next one. So this is self.page, and I'm simply increasing this by 1 plus equal 1. Now that I have this function, I would need to repeatedly call this. Right now, I'm only fetching this when my search term changes. Because of this little data stream, I'm triggering the search. So I also need to trigger this whenever I'm at the end of the already loaded list. And actually, I should check if I'm already loading or not. So basically, I also need to check the loading. Okay, maybe we do that afterwards. So I would need to trigger this function to have a function of load more. This doesn't take any arguments. And then I would call here fetch for search term. So this is the search term that I already used. I definitely need to work on certain things. There's a couple of bugs we're going to have a look at also. Okay, so now that I have this, I can go to my view and we can talk about when do I now call this load more function. I have here the list of all these items, and actually I just want to, when do I need to load this? When I reach the end of the list. How do I know that? We're going to do a little bit of a trick, because you can add views. We're just going to add a empty view at the end of our list, and we use this one's on appear to say, okay, that if this view that we have at the end appears, then we know that we are at the end and we should load more. Right now, I used here a list with iterating through all the albums, and I need to just add one more element at the end of the list, which means that I have to write this differently. I have to use a for each inside of these. For each, I have to just add one more level, more formatting. Okay, so I have a list, and now first I'm showing all of the albums, and then I can add more items. And right now, maybe we're just going to show a color, and I'm going to use a visible color of gray with a height. I need to give some height, otherwise it's going to be very small. And I'm setting this to 50. This I can add a on appear to, where I can execute a function, and I'm calling the view model dot load more. Although I think I did something, I need to fix something, because right now I'm simply replacing everything. So I would not actually create more. I need to append this. So because appending, and I need to do this in the for each. So for album in results.results, self.albums.append this element. So now I'm actually adding more. When I build and run this, you can see now this gray color line. This already imposes one problem. The first time this appears, I should actually not load anything. Or if I don't have any search terms, I should actually not load, because there's nothing in there. But let's first try if I can fetch something. So I just search for something, and we get our list. Now if I scroll down, you see at some point I get this gray box and I load more. Go down and go down. Now that we know this is basically working, I'm going to change here this gray color to something more interesting. Maybe we are going to use a loading indicator, and this is done in SwiftUI with a progress view. And I need to actually change the styling. This is progress. So usually it's the name of the view plus view styling or style. Circular. So I can add this. There's also another problem, but okay, maybe we start now by checking that we are not loading more if we don't in the very beginning, or if our text field is empty. So going to where I do my fetch request. The first thing I did here was creating the URL. I should actually not do this when my search term is empty. So first I check with God search term, how do I know, is empty. So this is actually supposed to be not empty. Else, now I stop, I return directly, and which means that if my string is empty, I'm not going to search something. And maybe I should add a print statement so I actually see when we are searching what. So before my URL session, I'm going to print start fetching data for, and I'm showing here my search term. Okay, now we can try again. I see, okay, I can filter my print results by start. So we actually never reached that point. That's good. I see my loading indicator directly. So maybe we should also hide this, decide when we are going to hide this. So this is just typing 1, and you see I get a print statement because I just started fetching something. So this is giving me a limit of 20. I scroll down and we fetched more. Okay, it seems to work now. I can fetch when this is true. So let's start again. I can press here on cancel. And you see I am actually, my strings are still there. My results are still there. And if I add now, type something differently, it's going to actually add them to the already existing list. So we need to work on clearing everything. When do we do this? When I change my search term, I start fetching. And this is actually when I should clear my search results. I probably shouldn't do this in this function because I also call this function when I load more. So I can basically do this here in the sync. So before I call fetch more, I can say self.albums is an empty array. Try again. I search for, I have this. Now I press on this exit button and my list is empty. So what I did is I clear the list, then I start call the fetch albums. But because I'm now here giving an empty string, I'm not actually continuing with the fetch, which is good. We don't do more work than we wanted to. Now, if I tap here on another letter, I start a new fetch request, and this time I only have the results for my second response. If I scroll down, it's loading more for this one. So now I cleared everything up at the right moment, I think. Now I want to talk about the loading indicator that I had here, because this is clearly not what I did. Basically, I just want to show this if I'm not already having something. And maybe we actually check. And the other thing is, if you, okay, this is probably, I need to actually do something differently. If you would now scroll to the end and then up again and then back, you might actually trigger this calls multiple times. So we should actually only, what I mean is, if we're already loading, we shouldn't start a new one because then we're actually losing some of the data, or it's in the wrong order. So when I start here my fetch, I actually should continue. I should actually have something, a property that I'm also going to use in my UI. So this is a add published var is loading. Bool. In the beginning I'm not loading. So when just before I start here my fetch request, I'm going to set the is loading to true, because now I start loading something. And when I come back, somewhere here, no matter if I have an error or if I have a data or something, I always should do this, and this has to be done in the main queue. This is queue.main.async, and I have to say my is loading is false. Now the last thing is, I can use this to only fetch more if I'm not already loading. And I actually should do this before I change here my offset. So guard is loading. Actually, it's not loading, else I'm going to stop and return. So we just want to make sure I don't load more than necessary, which I guess I won't see too much. So now I probably need to change this, because now in order to start this request and to show the indicator, I probably should use two views. So in my album list view, at first I should only have the progress view if I'm actually loading, because I have this property if it's loading. If I am loading, I'm showing the loading indicator. Else And else I show here a color.clear. Okay, maybe I use again a color.gray, just so we see which one is there. And I have a problem. Okay, self dot is... okay, I definitely should actually use here a weak self in order to not have a reference cycle problem. So all the self need to be now with question mark. Self dot pages and self dot self loading. So I have this gray box that I'm going to change to clear, and I can use I can type when I scroll down. Actually, it's so fast you won't see it, because as soon as it gets gray, we start a new loading, which sets it then to this loading indicator. Actually, I would need to probably scroll to the very end. Okay, now you see, because it finished, and now you see this gray box. This is because I've actually reached the end of the list. Even if I ask for more, there is no more data. So we could also have, if you don't want to send this again, we could also check the number of albums that are in there. If they are 20 or less, if they are less, then we know we actually finished. So this is a different distinction to loading. Did we finish or not? And because I have this multiple states that I'm already starting to get a little bit confused, and we didn't even talk about arrows, I'm going to say, instead of having here another property saying, did we load everything, I'm going to create a state which is an enums, because you either are loading, you either are in a good state, you either are in the arrow state, or we finished everything. So I need to create this state enum somewhere, and I'm going to do this in this view model, because it's a property that is only needed for this view model, because it's kind of the state of the view model. So this is an enum type. I'm just going to name the state. So what did I say? So I had the case of is loading, the case of loaded all, and the case of error, because this is alternatively to loading. And in this case, actually, I want to have an error, or maybe just a string, because we can then use this string value to show to the user so they know what's going on. And then maybe the first case that I didn't take care of yet is the case of good, or maybe just call it default. And now default is not allowed. Just go back to good. Plain, empty, start. I don't know. Okay, let's just stick with good. And the reason why I want to have this is as an alternative to is loading. This is now just state of type state, and in the beginning when we start, this is of type good. Okay, now my UI is going to complain and I have a lot of problems. Going to use the minimap so I see where to go. Okay, yes. I should only continue. So the question is, should I actually search? If I am in which of the states should I continue the search? In the good state of definitely. If I'm already in the loading state, then not. If I loaded everything, not. And if I had an error, let's just say not. So it's only if it's good. So if state is equal to good. Now, this is state. It's not comparable, I think. So I have to make this comparable. Okay, now it works. Comparable protocol, you can use something of comparing to properties, to values. The next one is here, just before I start my fetch request, I change my state to is loading. So the state is loading. Okay, when I come in my URL session, I could now change my is loading. So this is state. And this is actually a question of what I actually have here. So the default, like before, it would be good. But I also have some errors. So for example, if I have an error here, I could also change my state. Okay, maybe I change the dispatch queue to outs. So then I would do this differently if I'm in error or if I have a data. So I'm going to cut this and one time do this if I have an error, I'm going to say I have an error with could not load. And then you can also now here use the error.localized description. This should be something human readable, although you probably should define your own. Okay, then if I have some data and if I have some data, I try to decode this. I could have here another error. So I would actually do something very similar. Also change my state to I have here could not get data and then set this error message. And now finally the one where I actually have here good results. I can check how many albums I have. So if albums not count is equal to limit, then I can actually set, okay, this is self.state. So if I have 20 albums, then I know I can probably load more. This is not the correct way of doing this, although usually this is also a problem with this API. Usually they send you additional information of how many more results can you actually fetch, but we don't have this, so I kind of have to do a workaround. So if I have the exact number that I requested, I probably can load more. So we are in the good state. And otherwise, I'm guessing I loaded all. Okay, now I have to use here self dot. Okay, I have now this state that I also can use in my UI. So I can use, instead of using this is loading, I'm going to use because it's an enum, I use a switch case. So switch view model state case dot good. And in the good case, I just want to use the gray one, or actually in this case I can go for the proper one because the user is not supposed to see this, so I use clear. Then I have the case dot is loading. I'm going to show this loading indicator. So we have these two cases that we had before. Then I use the case of loaded all. And actually I don't really want to show anything because the user doesn't, the user already knows that it's probably the end of the screen if you can scroll further. So I use an empty view. And then I have the case we didn't talk about, the new one, which is the error. So this is message, let message. Let's just show a error message or this message. And maybe to make it a little bit more error visible, I'm going to use a foreground color of red or pink. Okay, also my preview works now. And in the beginning you see only just 2 lines. This is because I have here an empty view. If you prefer to do this a little bit differently, you can use a scroll view with a lazy stack. Okay, now I can search. You saw the loading indicator, and maybe we make this in the center. So this is frame maximum width of infinity. Okay, try again. So now it's in the center. If I test this, the first time I'm coming, I get here my clear view, which you see because it's 2 lines. I search. You saw shortly this loading indicator, and because I started loading, if I scroll down, I think I said something wrong. Okay, I'm going to, instead of this empty view where I don't get a visual feedback for me to debug this properly, I use a color.gray. Okay, so it says it loaded everything. I still have here this print statement, so I can check. It basically was fetched 2 times. Okay, try again. I type. I get my results. And I scroll down. I get here an error message. Could not get data. The data could not be read because it is missing. So I guess I have a decoding problem. And when I look here, yes, I do. And it's the copyright underlying error. No value associated with key, so I have to make this an optional. Copyright. So this is a string optional. So at least we have, you see an example of there was a problem. And I don't have a collection price. So I have to make this optional. In order to check this, I'm going to add another breakpoint here, just when I get my data back. Searching, and then it gets the first result back. I can check here in this results, and it says 20. This seems to be alright. So then I go further. Okay, maybe I step over, and then need to do this because it's like 20 times. It triggers it again. Okay, maybe I should not have done this breakpoint in the for each, but afterwards, so I'm removing this breakpoint. And I just press the play button. So now I get 20 results. And you can check the... okay, my problem is that the self... okay, sorry. I put here self... so what I have to compare is not the self albums, so the one that I have here. That's why I always stopped after 20, after 40. I have to use the results. So this the new albums that are returned are these ones. Okay, no wonder that I had this problem. Okay, let's try again. KA, scrolling down, gives me more. Although I don't really see this loading indicator. And the other thing, I actually have to clear, just because I had this. Here, when I change my search term, I actually have to clear a couple of things. And the other one was the albums array, and the other one is the state. So this has to be a good state again. In order to see all these changes, I'm going to add a print statements to the good. So I use the did set state changed to state. Okay, so now I tap. At first prints good. This is the initial one. Then we change to is loading, and then we are back to good. So now if I scroll, I actually should switch back to is loading. Yes. So you see we always good and then loading. Maybe should have typed something longer that... okay, this one, I guess it doesn't have... Yeah, for this one, it gives me a load all directly. Because it probably doesn't have any result. So my properties change correctly. As you see, we managed to create this infinite loading view. The one thing I don't like is if I have here in the beginning just this empty screen. Looking back on all the examples from the actual iTunes app, if there's nothing in the search term, there's a trending list. So this kind of trending terms we would actually fetch from the server. Ideally, I would get this from the server. I just don't have it. So I'm using some hard-coded values that are here. So, and this is actually instead of this whole list here, I would actually have this. So maybe I'm going to create here a struct album placeholder view. So I would have some kind of suggestions. This is an array of strings. So whatever you want, I can just put 3 of these terms. And then I need a body. Yeah, in this case, I probably only need a VStack with a for each of these suggestions. This is text, and I'm showing here a button. And the label is simply the text. Now this is an array of strings and they are not identifiable. So I have to give here the ID \self. This is okay in this case because I know all of the strings are unique and I'm not editing these strings, this array. It's just a constant array, so it's okay. And what I want to do is actually I want to change the search property in order to access or change something in a subview. It needs to be a binding. I think var search term. So when I press this button, my search term gets this value. And now I can use this placeholder view if I don't have actually a search term. So this is actually around this whole list. And at this point, maybe I should have actually did this a little bit differently. So maybe we are going to create different files for this. So this is already kind of an album list view. And maybe I'm going to create a album search view. We decide what to place where. So the album search view would be the outermost search view. And then once I'm at it, maybe we already, this has to be a string. Okay, now what I want to keep in here is just the list part. So I'm going to copy everything. It's going to be a little bit more tricky. And the list part here until the searchable. This is my album list view. And this should have actually the view model from its parent. So I have to change this top part to be an observed object. And this, because it only gets this view model from its parent. Now it's getting here a problem. I have to give here an instance of an album list view model. Okay, and this view is only supposed to have the list without the navigation view. And it has to be an observed, this is always the same, observed object, not observable. Is this now happy? And maybe I also move the placeholder in the top. Okay, now in this view, I can decide if my view model's search text is empty. Then I show my placeholder, album placeholder view, and else I'm going to show my album list view with the view model that I have here. So now it's going to, this complaint looks a lot worse than it actually is. The problem is here I have these two view modifiers that I want to add to an if statement. So I have to wrap this in a group with a little bit of formatting. And actually my placeholder view needs to also get the search term. So this is binding $search term. And actually, and this search term is in my view model, the search term. So I'm basically connecting this now. And I forgot this is a view. I think I just did too much. Okay, so I have my view here that I use with this group. And the group I just needed for this view modifier, so I can add them on multiple places. I mean to all of the group. Okay, maybe I should run this. In my content view, I now need to use the album search view. Okay, we start. And okay, this placeholder view is not the nicest, so if I now look at the preview, I can maybe add a title of this is trending, adding a font of title, a little bit more spacing, and I probably also can make this text larger. So this is font.title2. Oh yeah, we actually wanted to test if this is working. If I here tap on Rammstein, you see it placed the Rammstein in there. And we get our search results. If I go clean this, it goes back to show me this list. And if I search again, by typing this time, it starts to fetch them and we see the list. That is now scrolling. So we have all of these main cases of showing our nice search view now. So we now have finished quite nicely this search. What's coming next? So right now I only have this rather plain list. I would like to have this nicer layout. I would like to implement all the cells and also here the sections part. But one thing that already started bothering me is the way I constructed the network request. And this is just going to get a lot more messy if I start fetching here songs and movies. So in the next part, I'm going to talk a little bit of how to construct URLs in a more safe way and how we can make this part a little bit more reusable. I would also need to do this for songs and movies, and maybe handling this error cases gets a little bit out of hand. So we're going to also work on the network layer. And once we have that, we can very easily add requests for movies and songs and continue working on the UI afterwards. I hope to see you in the next part. Don't forget to give this video a like. You can also leave a comment if something wasn't clear. Until next time, happy coding!